This is a presentation of the Susquehanna Valley Church of Christ. As you gather around the Lord's table today, here are some things that we can think about, some things that we can reason on. The ancient Greek playwright Sophocles wrote, "Reason is God's greatest gift to mankind." God has given us a brain. He expects us to use it, to contemplate, to think on certain things. Isaiah said in Isaiah 1 and verse 18, "Come, let us reason together." It's important for us to use what God has given us, and He's given us that ability to think. So as you sit around God's table today and sup with Him, think about these things. First of all, think about your covenant that you made with God. A covenant is an agreement, a contract, a treaty, or a pact or accord. Remember that when we became Christians, that we promised God we would honor Him by living as a Christian should. He agreed to be your God. You agreed to be His child. The Lord's Supper is a meal that we eat that reflects our covenant with God. Jesus made this very clear in Matthew 26 and verse 28. He said, "For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many as the forgiveness of sins." The Lord's Supper, therefore, becomes a great time for us to examine our lives, as Paul told the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. We need to ask ourselves, am I keeping up my end of the covenant? Am I keeping up my end of that agreement that I made with God? The Lord's Supper can be a moment of great resolve to be all that we can be for the Lord. Think about that covenant that you made with Him. Think about the body of the Lord. No one impacted the world more than Jesus. All that He did it with His body. And John tells us in John chapter 21 and verse 25 that there are so many things that just aren't recorded about what He did. So many acts and so many things that we just don't know about. But how does Jesus impact the world today? Well, it's still through His body. That is to say, the church. We, as Christians, as God's children, are His hands and His feet, His eyes and ears and mouth today. As we partake of the bread today, which represents His body, we need to think about our role within the body. Do you realize that God has given you certain abilities that He wants you to use within His church? 1 Peter 4 and verse 10. Are you doing your part in the body of Christ? Are you helping Christ impact the world today? As we gather around the Lord's table, this is a good thought for us to concentrate on. Think about Jesus as the bread of life. The bread that we partake of is symbolic of His body, which died to give us life. Jesus is the bread of life. John records for us in John 6 and verse 35 that Jesus said, "I am the bread of life." As we share in that bread today, are we sharing Him with others in the life that we live? Are there others that you could be sharing Him with? Think about those who are yet hungry and thirsty for an answer to their soul's deepest longing. As we gather around the Lord's table and think about Jesus as the bread of life, think about how we can share that bread with others. Think about the blood of the Lord. As you partake of the fruit of the vine, it might be a good time to ask the Lord to help you to never do anything that would show a lack of appreciation for the blood that He spilt for us. The Hebrew writer records in Hebrews 10 and verse 29, "How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and profaned the blood of the covenant by which He was sanctified?" It's a good time for us to ask Him to help us show Him more each day how much His blood truly means to us and how important it is to our lives. As we gather around the Lord's table, let's think about the blood of Christ. Let's think about how our actions reflect upon it. And let's think about what it really means to us. Think about the cup that Jesus had to drink. Matthew 26, verse 42, Matthew records, again, for a second time, he went away, speaking of Jesus, while he was in the garden. He went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass until I drink it, your will be done." Jesus drank of a dreadful cup. It was a cup that contained mocking, a scourging, spitting upon him, nails, abandonment, and he drank it down to the dregs. The cup that you drink during the Lord's Supper spared us from all these things which we deserved. That can help us keep our false thoughts focused as we gather around the Lord's table to think about what Jesus endured for us. Think about the communion that we share with Christ and the entire body of Christ. It is a wonderful thought to realize that on the Lord's Day, there really is just one bread being partaken of by the entire body of Christ. Paul records in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 17, "Because there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of that one bread." Take time to think about all the wonderful people that we are in communion with in the body of Christ. Think about those who perhaps influenced us and have passed on to their reward. Think about those that, while we're not sitting near them today, we have sat near them in the past and the blessing that they were to us. Think about those around the world that we are in communion with, on continents that we've never stepped foot. We are in fellowship with them through the gospel. Most of these are people that we will likely never meet this side of heaven, but we will meet them someday. Let's thank Jesus for His sacrifice, which has brought us into communion with His people, no matter where they're meeting all over this world. These are just a few thoughts that can fill our minds during the Lord's Supper. It is my prayer that these few suggestions will help all of our minds to be focused on Him as we commune around the Lord's table.